This one's rather contentious for many reasons, and I live in what is still really a rural sort of agricultural area, even though this town, its sort of economy and its standard of living and its prices are gentrified, I believe is the in word. There have been an influx of people from not round these parts. Those people happen to be rather wealthy retirees from more of the City of London parts. So when we talk about movement of people being bad for local economies, well, these people are very wealthy, which is good for the local economy, but it's pushing the prices far out of reach of the not wealthy people already living here. An aside, again, not really the point of this, because the point of this is farming and money. Farmers, will they lose money with the EU funding being cut? Well, the rebate effectively goes to the farmers. So the argument is, we will just continue to give them that money without having to deal with the EU at any step. The question is more, will we? In terms of just the direct funding, because I think farming has a much more complicated situation than just money when it comes to the EU. And all of these points, again, in fact, all of the arguments for and against the EU, people make them in isolation too many times, rather than accepting that it's part of a bigger, more interconnected picture. But just on the topic of funding, the government doesn't have to pay what it's currently paying. If there's less money in the pot, which goes back to the economy argument, where the economy will benefit to the tune of, it won't. There's very few people, even Leaves economists, have said it won't. There will at the very least be a short-term dip, a short-term shortfall, a short-term less money to go around. So if the government has less money to pay out, will it continue to pay the same to farmers? If the pound devalues, the government may still give the same amount of money, but in real terms it will be worth less. So that area is probably going to depend on the strength of the farming lobbies, and public opinion to an extent. Who can make the best political argument to grab the cash? And if the farmers don't make the best argument, they're not going to get the cash. That's how it is in these things. That's kind of like the abbreviated version of how people get money out of a government. And with that in mind, we could argue that the money will still be the same, and we could try to argue it will still be worth the same. It won't, which would mean then the number has to go up to compensate for the pound being worth less. But that is a very simplified view of it anyway. It goes beyond that. If we leave the EU, what will farming do for seasonal workers? If we leave the EU and therefore people talk about putting quotas on immigration, only wanting the best and the brightest from around the world, the best and the brightest aren't going to want to pick strawberries in summertime in a farm. There will be an issue where we don't really indigenously have that mobile a workforce, and we have places with very seasonal work that can't sustain a workforce outside of those times. What are we going to do if we reduce the mobility of a workforce, which to an extent could mean the mobility of a migrant workforce? That's something to bear in mind with farming. The flip side of that is farmers will quite probably, if we leave the EU and therefore leave worrying about food production standards, farmers will be able to put more growth hormones into cows and chickens and sheep. Farmers will be able to use more hormones, more synthetics, more astringent pesticides, more damaging fertilizers to grow crops for a cheaper price. They're possibly seeing less money, or they're trying to get the same amount of money per kilo for things that are costing them less to make. If you deregulate a lot of the standards that current farming has to meet, then you are messing with our food production. So you are looking at quite possibly increased costs in food production. And one argument has been, well, if it costs us more, we'll just buy our food cheaper from somewhere else, because when we're not in the EU, we can. Do we want to buy cheap, zero-standard food? This is the stuff we eat. This is the stuff that we need to survive and grow and thrive and just to exist. So we need to be very careful as to where we fall with this. America's beef is so pumped full of growth hormones. It should never be anywhere near a dinner plate, in my opinion. I'm not saying all of their beef, but the lowest common standard would struggle to pass health concerns. And we already talk in this country about, I don't like these carrots, they don't taste carroty, or this beef's a bit this. It's not going to get better if things can be produced even cheaper and sold at the same price, which is quite possibly a repercussion of leaving the EU. So the farming issue goes beyond the matter of this subsidy. And like all of these issues in isolation, you could say, well, yeah, that might be the case, so why am I worrying? But you have to look at the bigger picture. And the bigger picture could be pesticides that wipe out the bee population, which then has a knock-on effect on other agricultural uses in the environment. It could be more hormones in food, which does have an impact on human health. It could be so many things. And like all of these things, it's best to look beyond face value and actually just do a bit of research and think, is that this way or the other? This person says it's this way. Let's see if I can find a counterpoint. And where's the truth going to lie? Probably somewhere in between the two statements. But yeah, in my opinion, I think this goes far beyond farmers getting the same amount of money. And I'm not convinced they'd get the same amount of money anyway.